Here's how a scandal became a racist smear, became an attempt to essentially ethnically cleanse a community of its now disfavored minority. So way back when, during the pandemic, there was lots of fraud happening. Lots of fraud with the Paycheck Payment Protection Program, I think it's what it's called, Payment Protection Program, PPP. Lots of fraud with various programs states and the federal government set up to provide people with income as the economy entered its pandemic downturn. In Minnesota, a group of people took advantage of the sudden generosity of the state and federal government, as well as just the crisis atmosphere to engage in fraud, billing the state for services that they just didn't provide. This is a somewhat common form of benefits fraud. Current Florida Senator Rick Scott was in fact criminally investigated for this exact kind of fraud when he ran a medical company, defrauding federal healthcare services to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's something, obviously, that the government notices and tries to punish pretty quickly. In Minnesota, this defrauding of state services ended up costing the state, I believe, around $1 billion over the course of several years. Massive fraud. Now, 86 people were convicted in this fraud scheme in Minnesota. 78 of those people were of Somali origin. Minnesota has the nation's largest Somali-American population, as well as largest population of Somali-born Americans. About 80,000 live in the state. Enter Christopher Rufo, a conservative propagandist, provocateur, however you want to describe him, who at his perch at the New York City-based Manhattan Institute has been responsible for basically spreading any number of panics about things typically associated with progressives. Rufo is in particular responsible for spreading the critical race theory panic of several years ago, which prompted book bannings and attempts to shut down any discussion of race or racism or even civil rights history in America's schools and universities, and which is in some ways still ongoing with this administration's assault on DEI. Rufo is very proud of his work and is very eager to do more of this, race baiting, racial demagoguery against groups of people. And so he picked up on the fraud story and made it less a story of administrative failure and social services and more a story of these perfidious Somalis. In Rufo's hands, the story became a cautionary tale about letting people from developing countries into your country. Now here it's worth a moment to talk a little bit about something called a base rate fallacy. Let's imagine a town that has 1 million people. A city that has 1 million people, and in that city, 100,000 of them have red hair. Now let's say that for whatever reason, the police are on the hunt for shoplifters, and over the course of a week, they caught 100 shoplifters, and all of those shoplifters have red hair. Now one way to interpret this data would be to say that, oh, red-headed people are more likely to shoplift than everyone else. But this, my friends, would be a base rate fallacy, because you're looking at the specific situation and not the broader context, not the base rate. If we zoom out, what we see is that 100 red-headed shoplifters constitutes just 0.1% of the overall population of red-headed people in our imaginary city. And so there's no reason, there's no evidence really, to conclude that red-headed people are more likely to shoplift. If anything, you'd want to look at some other variable that might explain why these particular people were shoplifting. But redheadedness is not going to do it for you because 99.9% of the redheads don't shoplift. You see base rate errors everywhere in discussions of crime and criminality. People look at the incidence of one group in a collection of statistics and conclude, based off of that, of some broad propensity, neglecting to look at the overall context. They say X percentage of people who commit violent crime are Y. They don't ask what percentage of Y commits violent crime. You can see where I'm going with this. Rufo was taking advantage of the base rate fallacy to smear all Somalis as being criminals. Now this made its way through the various conservative propaganda channels all the way up to the President of the United States, who is marinating in conservative propaganda. Now, the president in his first term spoke derisively of so-called shithole countries.
Referring to African countries and Haiti, the president then went on to talk about how they needed to bring in more people from places like Norway.
And he considers Somalia one of those shithole countries. One of his nemesis, you might say, is Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, who is a liberal Democrat who has been quite a thorn in the president's side. Trump is constantly attacking Omar, seeing her as ungrateful to the United States because she criticizes him. J.D. Vance has also joined in on this as well, doing his "Hey boss, look at me" act to also demonstrate his commitment to this gutter xenophobia. Somalians aren't the only group of Americans that Trump and Vance have turned their hateful rhetoric towards. Recall last year when they engaged in demagogic slander of Haitian Americans in Springfield, Ohio, accusing them of eating their neighbors' pets.
Just to go into another subject, what they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
In any case, this latest story has really incensed the president, and he has used it to declare that he no longer wants Somalians in the United States.
Now I'm understanding, and you're going to look at that, Scott. I hear they ripped off Somalians, ripped off that state for billions of dollars, billions, every year, billions of dollars, and they contribute nothing. The welfare is like 88%. They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks, and we don't want them in our country. I could say that about other countries, too.
Other Republicans have picked up on this, accusing the Somali community in Minnesota of being a haven of fraudsters and criminals, engaging in the kinds of rhetoric that we've seen prior to ethnic cleansing campaigns in other parts of the world.
80% of the crimes being committed in the Twin Cities in Minnesota are being committed by Somalis.
The Department of Homeland Security has now announced a campaign against Somalians in Minnesota, and we can expect an active effort to expel as many of them from the state and from the country as possible. All because of this racist smear, all because of the president's bigotry. The president's bigotry being directly transformed into actual policy. In short, how we get from a scandal to a smear to kind of an ethnic cleansing campaign. When people like me describe the president as racist, when they describe the administration as white nationalist, you'll often hear defenders or apologists of the president say that this is outrageous. I've never heard him use a racial slur. I've never heard him directly attack an entire group of people. Now, to that I would say, I've been paying attention to the guy's words very closely for basically a decade at this point, and if you have not heard these things, you have not been paying attention, if not outright slurs, and certainly lots of other derogatory language. But I think here we see such a clear example of the racial animus that courses through the president and his administration. The desire to rid the nation of people from so-called shithole countries. This belief that to be an American is to belong to a certain ethnic group, to a certain religious group, to have a certain origin in the nation. And they're not shy about this. J.D. Vance has said it quite explicitly.
I think the people whose ancestors fought in the Civil War have a hell of a lot more claim over America than the people who say they don't belong. Because America is not just an idea, we're a particular place with a particular people and a particular set of beliefs and way of life.
America for Americans, where Americans don't look like me, and I am as native born as they come. This week, I watched a 90s B-movie, Best of the Best 3. It's a sequel in the Best of the Best series. It's good. It's good for what it is, a B-movie. But I was struck by something. The villains in the film are neo-Nazis. And when you listen to the rhetoric of these neo-Nazi characters in the film, it sounds very familiar.
We will no longer remain the silent majority. This is white man's land! My people will not be tolerated!
Tell me, what's the difference between that and this?
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison